The desert stretched in every direction, vast and hushed, the air cool with the coming of night. The sky above was soft with the final light of dusk, stars just beginning to prick through its curtain. Musa walked steadily, his staff in hand, guiding his small family across the terrain. The rhythm of his steps was steady, practiced, a man who had known both the stillness of exile and the weight of returning. Beside him, his wife rode atop a simple mount, bundled against the cold. Their few belongings were strapped to the saddle, practical and sparse, reflecting the life they had lived in Madyan for years, a life of simplicity, peace, and quiet labor. There had been no urgent reason to leave that land. In Madyan, Musa had found shelter after fleeing Egypt, found love and work, found the warmth of a father-in-law who welcomed him as a son. But something had begun to stir in his heart. It wasn't restlessness. It was something deeper, quieter, a feeling he could not name, but one that grew stronger with each passing day. He had spoken little of it to his wife, only that he felt they must return to Egypt, not for himself, not for the past, but because his heart told him something waited there, something unfinished. The journey was long and slow. By day, they moved carefully, the desert wind sometimes sharp, other times eerily still. By night, they rested where they could, often under the open sky. Musa had always been drawn to solitude. In those long silences with only the stars overhead, he would pray without words, a quiet appeal from the soul. Though he had grown up in Pharaoh's palace, clothed in fine linens and trained in the way of rulers, that life felt distant now. That Egypt was not the Egypt he was returning to. He was no longer the young man full of strength and confusion. He was a husband, a father, a shepherd. Yet even so, the past followed him like a shadow that stretched long in the dusk. As they neared the mountainous region around Sinai, the terrain became more rugged, the wind more insistent. His wife was cold, and their supplies were running low. Musa kept a watchful eye, hoping to find shelter, a place to make fire and rest before the night grew too dark. Then, without warning, something caught his eye in the distance. It was a flame. At first he thought it might be a trick of the wind or the stars, but the light shimmered in a way that did not waver. It held still, unmoved by the wind, burning bright and strange against the rocky slope of the mountain. He stopped in his tracks, eyes narrowing. The flame seemed to hover upon the side of Mount Tur, not far, but far enough that he would need to leave the path and climb. He turned to his wife and spoke softly, trying not to alarm her. He told her to wait where she was, to rest, that he had seen a fire and would go to it. Perhaps he could bring back a brand, or find someone nearby who could guide them to shelter. She nodded, weary but trusting, and pulled her cloak tighter around her as she settled with their child. Musa turned toward the light and began to walk. The mountain rose ahead of him, silent and ancient, its contours carved by time. With each step, the fire grew clearer. It flickered with a steady pulse, but did not smoke, nor shift with the wind. The closer he came, the more unusual it appeared. This was no ordinary fire. It burned without consuming, without spreading, without sound. It was contained, yet vast in its presence. His feet slowed as he neared it, heart quickening with something he could not name. Awe, curiosity, fear, all braided together in the quiet of that mountain. There was no one around, no footprints, no sound of shepherds or travelers, just the flame, cradled in the heart of a bush that stood rooted among the rocks. And still, it burned without harm. The bush did not blacken, its branches did not curl inward. The fire was alive, but it was not like any fire he had ever known. He stepped closer, eyes locked on the flame, breathing shallow. Then it happened. A voice. Not like any voice from the world of men. It did not come from the left or the right, not above or behind. It filled the space and yet came from no direction at all. It entered through no ear, yet it reached into his very soul. "O Musa." He froze. The name rang through him like a bell struck deep within his chest. It was not a question. It was not a call. It was a knowing. "O Musa." His knees buckled and he fell forward, face to the ground. He trembled not from cold, not from fear of the flame, but from the weight of something far beyond his understanding. His heart pounded in his chest as if it might break free. Indeed, I am your Lord. The words were not heard. They were known, felt in every part of him. They carried no echo, no pause, and yet they were more clear than anything he had ever known in all his years. They burned brighter than the flame before him. So remove your sandals. The command came not with force, but with sacred finality, the kind that invites no delay. He reached down with shaking hands, unfastened the worn straps, and placed his bare feet upon the cool earth. You are in the sacred valley of Tua. He had no words, no thoughts even, only surrender. The air around him felt charged with a presence too great to grasp, the kind of majesty that silences the body and stills the tongue. Time seemed to fold upon itself. The stars above continued to spin, but here in this place, all things stilled. He had long wondered if his life had meaning, if fleeing Egypt was the end of his story, if his time in Madyan was his only purpose. But now, in this moment, none of those questions remained. They did not need to. He was in the presence of his Lord, and the truth was not told to him, it was given. His body, his past, his fears, even his name, all of it seemed to dissolve into a single truth, that he was not alone, that he had never been, that the Lord who now spoke to him had always been near. From the waters of the Nile, where he was placed as an infant, to the halls of Pharaoh's palace, to the deserts of exile, and now here, on this mountain, where fire burned but did not consume. He did not yet know why he had been called. He did not yet know the burden or the mercy that would follow, but he knew he was being spoken to, directly, intimately, without veil. The fire shimmered on, still and bright, as if waiting, and Musa, barefoot upon the sacred ground, dared not move. He was ready to listen. The night air grew heavier as Musa stood, breathless, at the edge of the fire's glow. The bush that burned remained unchanged, its branches whole, its leaves untouched by flame. The fire danced quietly, yet with a presence that reached beyond sight, as though it held a secret not meant for ordinary eyes. The mountain around him was silent. Even the wind had stilled, as if the world itself were waiting for what would come next. The sand beneath his feet cooled his skin, and the absence of his sandals made every sensation feel sharper. Each grain of earth pressed against him, reminding him that he was standing in a place that was not like other places. This was a valley chosen not by accident, but by divine will. The voice had come again, clear and full of certainty, calling him by name. There was no sound like thunder, no cracking of heavens, no tremor in the earth, and yet it had undone him. The voice had stripped away the silence of the night and replaced it with a truth too vast for language. Now he stood with his heart exposed, filled with a trembling that was not born of fear but of reverence, so deep it made fear unnecessary. The bush still burned. The voice had not returned, but the echo of it pulsed within him, not in his ears, not even in his mind. It lived deeper than that. It had reached into the marrow of his soul. He stepped closer, not out of boldness, but out of something that felt like longing. The flame did not leap at him or shrink away. It stayed, steady and pure. There was a calmness to it, a majesty that didn't beg attention but simply commanded it by existing. He took another step and then another, until he was close enough to feel the warmth without heat. There was no smoke, no crackling, no scent of anything burning, only the glow of a fire that was not a fire. It bathed the rocks in his hands in gold, and in that light, his skin looked unfamiliar to him, as though even his body was being shown in a new way. Suddenly the voice returned. This time it did not call his name. It spoke with a still certainty that pierced the veil between heaven and earth. Indeed, I am Allah. There is no God but me, so worship me, and establish prayer for my remembrance. Musa's heart surged within him. The words did not confuse. They clarified. They did not demand with harshness. They revealed with finality. This was not a conversation between equals. This was not the voice of a man or a spirit or a dream. This was truth speaking to creation, and that creation was him. The words settled in his bones. Every syllable carried purpose. There was no wasted breath. In those words, the entire purpose of his life began to take shape. He was not lost. He was not forgotten. He was known, deeply, intimately, eternally known. He tried to speak, to respond in some way, but his tongue felt heavy. The awe of it all pressed upon him. The fire pulsed gently, like a heartbeat, and the voice continued. The hour is coming, I almost keep it hidden so that every soul may be rewarded for what it strives toward. He listened, hardly daring to blink. These were not riddles. They were truths. Truths too great for the world to hold in one moment. And yet they were being entrusted to him. The voice held authority, yes, but also mercy. A mercy that did not pity but embraced. A mercy that did not soften truth but gave strength to face it. What is that in your right hand, O Musa? The question surprised him, not because it was strange, but because it was personal. The voice had shifted in tone, as though inviting him not just to listen but to speak. And so, with trembling breath, he answered, "It is my staff. I lean on it, and with it I beat down leaves for my sheep, and I have other uses for it." Even as he spoke, he wondered at the answer. It was a simple object. A shepherd's staff, worn smooth by time and use, something ordinary. But in this moment, nothing felt ordinary. The voice did not rebuke him, did not rush him. It had invited him to speak, and it had listened. "Throw it down, O Musa." The command landed like a stone in a still pond. Musa looked at the staff in his hand. It had been with him for years. He had leaned on it during long walks, used it to guide his flock, to defend against wild animals. It was familiar. It was his. And now he was being asked to cast it aside. He hesitated, but only briefly. The voice had not led him into fear. It had led him into presence. And so he obeyed. He opened his fingers and let the staff fall. As it struck the ground, it changed. In the blink of an eye, the wood twisted, lengthened, and writhed. The dry sound of it scraping against the stones filled the air, and before him, the staff had become a living serpent. Not a symbol, not a vision, a real moving creature, alive and terrible in its power. It slithered toward him, scales glistening in the strange light of the fire, tongue flicking as it hissed. Musa leapt back in fear, heart hammering, body twisting to flee. Instinct overtook him. It was not every day one saw the lifeless transformed into life, the familiar into the unknown. "Do not be afraid." The voice again, calm, anchoring, as though to say, "This is not danger, it is a sign. Reach out your hand and grasp it." The command defied logic. Who would touch a serpent with bare hands? But the voice had not lied. It had not harmed. It had revealed. Musa reached forward, hand trembling, and took hold of the serpent by its body. In an instant it stilled. It did not struggle. And then it changed again, back into the staff. Solid, silent, familiar. He held it in his hand, but it no longer felt the same. It had been transformed, and now, so had he. He would never again see it as just wood, just a stick. It had been used to show him the power that lay beyond the veil of the visible. "Insert your hand into your garment." He obeyed. He slipped his hand beneath his robe, pressing it against his chest. The fire pulsed softly as he waited. "Now draw it out." He did. His hand shone bright, white with a light that did not belong to skin. It glowed with a purity, a brightness that did not burn but illuminated. Then he placed it back as commanded, and it returned to its natural state. These were not tricks. They were not illusions. They were signs, real, divine signs, not for amusement, not for spectacle, but for conviction, for strength, for purpose. Musa's chest rose and fell. The night had not changed, but everything within it had. The stars still turned overhead. The desert still stretched out behind him. His family still waited below. But he was not the man who had left them only minutes before. The fire still burned without consuming. The voice still lingered, not in sound but in nearness. And within him, a new light had begun to rise. Musa stood frozen in place, his breath shallow, his mind trying to catch up with what had just unfolded. The fire before him flickered with the same calm brilliance, the bush unharmed, its branches still green in the glow of a flame that did not consume. The staff was back in his hand, unchanged in shape, but never to be ordinary again. His palm still tingled from holding what had been alive only moments before. And within him, something deeper than understanding had begun to stir. It was not merely awe. It was not fear in the way men fear storms or enemies. It was something else entirely, a trembling reverence. The kind of reverence that presses the soul down into stillness and opens the heart wide with recognition. Then the voice returned. Its presence was not like sound, but like being filled with light from the inside out. It did not strike the ears so much as settle over everything, as if the entire mountain had become its instrument. "O Musa," his name was spoken again, not with force, but with a nearness that folded space and time. There was something in the way it was said that reminded him he was known completely. Not just his name, not just his shape, but the story of him, the doubts he carried, the wounds he had never voiced aloud, the memory of Egypt that clung like a shadow. All of it was seen. All of it was known. It was not the same as being watched by men. When Pharaoh's guards had watched him, when whispers followed him through the palace corridors, it had been a scrutiny that sought fault. This was different. This was being seen by the one who had no need to seek, because he already knew. It made Musa feel weightless and heavy at once. "I am your Lord." The words carried the force of the heavens behind them, and yet they came with the gentleness of rain falling on dry earth. They did not require belief to be true. They simply were. And in their truth, every illusion fell away. This was not a voice demanding submission by threat. This was a voice offering clarity, offering being. It was the sound of reality itself revealing what had always been. Musa had not discovered this place. He had not stumbled into something by chance. He had been brought, chosen, called. "I have chosen you, so listen to what is revealed." His knees gave way again. He lowered himself to the ground, not because he was told to, but because there was no other posture left to him. To stand felt like arrogance. To speak felt like interruption. All he could do was listen, heart open, body still, soul bare. "Indeed, I am Allah. There is no God but me." The words felt like the axis of creation. Around them, everything turned. They were not arguments or teachings. They were not offered as conclusions after debate. They were the origin of truth itself. They did not ask to be accepted. They simply were. And in that moment, every idol of men, every imagined power, every whisper of doubt melted away like mist in the morning sun. "So worship me, and establish prayer for my remembrance." There was no threat in the command, no harshness, only invitation. It was as if the one who made the stars was telling Musa that the only true response to existence was remembrance. That prayer was not a duty imposed, but a path home, a way of aligning the soul with the rhythm of what is real. Worship was not for Allah's need, but for Musa's wholeness, for the restoration of a connection that had always been intended. The voice did not stop there. "Indeed, the hour is coming, I almost keep it hidden so that every soul may be recompensed for what it strives toward." The words carried a weight that stretched beyond the moment, beyond the mountain, beyond Musa himself. They reached forward through the future and back into the past. The hour, the day that would unveil all things, that would show the truth of every hidden thought, every intention, every action, not for punishment alone, but for revelation. The voice was telling him that nothing would be lost, that every effort, every longing, every act of injustice or mercy would be seen, would be answered. It was a reminder not just of consequence, but of meaning. So do not let one who does not believe in it and follows his own desire turn you away from it, lest you perish. The voice did not warn with the tone of a threat, but with the tenderness of a guide who knows the path ahead and sees the cliff before the traveler does. It was a protection. a caution offered by one who knows the fragile state of the human heart and how easily it can be pulled away by distraction or arrogance. There was no fear-mongering here, only truth spoken plainly. It was up to Musa to hold to it. Still kneeling, still silent, Musa felt as though he were being reformed, not changed into someone else, but revealed as who he had been made to be. His time in Pharaoh's palace, his exile in Madyan, the guilt that had followed him since the day he struck the Egyptian, all of it now took on new shape. He had thought of himself as a fugitive, as a man cast out, but here, in the light of this fire, with the voice of his Lord filling the night, he understood something he had never dared to hope. He was not abandoned. He was not disqualified. He had been prepared. His heart stirred with memory, the river that had carried him as a child, the arms of the queen who had raised him like a son, the years of training in the courts of Pharaoh, the confusion, the anger, the deep thirst for justice that had never left him. He had been shaped by it all, and now the one who had shaped him was calling him. There was no doubt in the voice that spoke to him, no hesitation, only certainty, flowing like a current too wide to cross. Musa did not know yet what would be asked of him, but he knew that whatever it was, it would be true, it would be just, it would matter. The fire burned on. The bush still stood whole. The mountain was silent, except for the words that had changed everything. "You are in the sacred valley of Tur." The name rang through him. Tur, a name he had never known, now etched into the fabric of his soul. The place had been marked not by its location, but by what had occurred there. A place where earth had met heaven, where fear had been turned into clarity, where silence had been broken by mercy. Still kneeling, still barefoot, still holding the staff that had become a serpent, and then a staff again, Musa felt the gravity of the moment settle over him like a second skin. The air was not lighter now. It was heavier, filled with purpose. Every breath he took felt sacred. He had come looking for fire. What he had found was far greater. Not warmth alone, not direction alone. He had found the voice of his Lord, and nothing would ever be the same again. The fire glowed steadily, golden against the rocks and low shrubs, casting shadows that danced but never stretched far. Musa remained where he was, heart held in the grip of something that did not pass like fear or fade like awe. The presence he felt did not relent or pull away. It was as though the air itself had been filled with certainty, and Musa stood at its center, stilled not by command but by recognition. He no longer questioned where he was or why he had come. He no longer sought explanations for the path that had led him from the palace to exile, from exile to solitude, and from solitude to this mountain. He simply waited, his soul open, waiting for what his Lord would do next. The voice came again, not louder, not softer, but with a new kind of intensity. Musa felt it settle over him like a mantle, invisible yet undeniable. He did not flinch now, though his body remained tense, alert as if every hair on his arms and neck stood upright. The fire still burned, but its light had become more than something to see. It was something he felt inside his chest. Every word from the unseen voice etched itself into him with a clarity that nothing before had given him. "Throw your staff." He heard it clearly. The voice did not ask, nor threaten. It spoke as one who already knew what would happen. Musa glanced down at the familiar piece of wood in his hand. It was smooth from years of use. The length of it bore his fingerprints, worn in grooves that only he would recognize. It had guided sheep, defended against wild animals, helped him walk over rough terrain. It had been with him every day for years. There was a comfort in it, not because it was powerful, but because it was his. Yet now, in the light of this fire, even the staff seemed to carry more than its own weight. Still kneeling, Musa lifted the staff and cast it forward onto the rocky ground. It struck the earth with a dull sound, the wood bouncing once, rolling a little, then resting. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, without warning, the shape began to ripple. It was not like watching something change. It was like watching something reveal its true form. The wood bent and writhed, curling in on itself. A sound came, a dry hiss and scrape, like scales dragging over stone. Musa's eyes widened. The staff had become a serpent. It was no mere snake. It was large, alive, full of motion, its body thick and powerful. Its tongue flicked in and out, testing the air. Its tail coiled and uncoiled with a strength that spoke of danger. It moved with purpose, not in panic, but with awareness. The way it turned toward him made Musa recoil. He stepped back quickly, fear gripping his limbs, his breath caught in his throat. For a moment he could not think, only react. This creature, once harmless in his hand, was now something that could strike, bite, even kill. He turned, heart racing, almost ready to run, but the voice spoke again, "Do not be afraid." The words halted him, not because they were loud, but because they were steady. They cut through his panic like light through mist. He froze, breathing hard, eyes locked on the serpent that had once been a simple staff. The voice did not scold him. It calmed him, as if it had already known he would react that way, as if even his fear was not a surprise. "Pick it up." Musa turned slightly, glancing down at the creature. Pick it up. The idea was almost unthinkable, yet something within him responded not with resistance, but with growing trust. He remembered how it had changed. He remembered that it was not just a snake, and that this was not a moment built on tricks or illusions. This was not a magician's game. This was truth revealing itself in ways that defied understanding. He stepped forward, slowly, hand outstretched. The serpent stilled as he neared it, its tongue slipping in and out, its eyes watching. Musa lowered his hand and grasped it firmly. The skin beneath his fingers was not what he expected. It did not bite. It did not writhe. It simply shifted, and in an instant, it was a staff again, silent and familiar in his grip. He stared at it, breathing slowly now. The wood was warm, but it no longer frightened him. What he had just witnessed was not about fear. It was about power, real power. The kind that transforms without breaking. The kind that reveals what the eye cannot see. The kind that belongs only to the Creator. "Now place your hand into your cloak." The command came gently. Musa did not hesitate. He slid his right hand beneath his robe, pressing it against his chest. He held it there for a moment, feeling the heat of his own body, the stillness of the air, the silent fire flickering before him. "Now draw it out." He obeyed. As his hand emerged, it shone with a brilliance that startled him. It was not bloodied or burned. It was not the light of reflection. It was the light of something divine. His skin glowed, a whiteness not of illness but of purity, bright and unmistakable in the night. The fire lit the scene, but the hand glowed with a light of its own. He stared at it, turning it slowly in the air. It was still his hand, yet it bore a light that had not come from within him. "Now return it to your cloak." He placed it back, slowly, reverently. When he drew it out again, the light was gone, and his skin was as it had always been. But he had seen it. He had held that light in his own fingers, and he knew without a doubt that the one speaking to him had control over not just fire and wood and creatures, but over flesh, over what is hidden, over what is made. "These are 2 signs from your Lord to Pharaoh and his chiefs. Indeed, they have been a people defiantly disobedient." Musa listened carefully, his heart steady now. The voice no longer surprised him. It guided him. He began to understand. These were not tricks to impress. They were signs to convict. They were meant for those who had turned away from truth, for the one who had raised himself above all others, who claimed to be God among men. The staff and the hand were proofs, yes, but also mercy. They were invitations to believe, to submit, to return. He looked again at the staff in his hand. It had become more than a tool. It was now part of a purpose. The fear he had felt earlier had not vanished, but it had been transformed. What once made him tremble now made him ready, not ready in strength or confidence, but ready in trust. The mountain remained quiet. The fire burned on. The air still felt heavy, but no longer oppressive. It was full of meaning, full of presence. Musa stood in it not as a man who had stumbled into something strange, but as a man who had been invited into something sacred. And in the quiet that followed, he waited again, for what would come next. for what his Lord would ask of him now. The stillness of the mountain settled around Musa once more, but it was no longer the stillness of a man standing alone. It was the stillness of one who had seen signs, who had held something sacred in his own hands. The staff was no longer just a staff. His hand was no longer just flesh. His ears had heard the voice of the Most High, and now his heart was waiting for the next command, trembling not from fear but from the weight of anticipation. The fire continued to burn before him, unwavering, pure and steady. It had not dimmed, nor shifted in the wind. It had not consumed the bush. It had not faded since the first moment he saw it. It was still there, a sign of presence, a witness to the unfolding of something eternal. The voice returned, deep and calm, as if the entire mountain spoke with it. Musa felt it move through him, not brushing past, but filling every empty space within. Go to Pharaoh. Indeed, he has transgressed. Musa closed his eyes, as if that might steady the rushing in his chest. There it was, the purpose, the reason he had been called. Not just to witness signs, not just to hear the voice of his Lord, but to carry that voice into the heart of tyranny. The fire of the bush was not meant to remain here. Its light was meant to challenge the darkness in Egypt. Musa was being asked to carry that light into the very court he had fled, the court where Pharaoh sat in gold, clothed in pride, wrapped in cruelty, the court where injustice had become law and power had become worshipped, the court where Musa had once stood, not as a messenger, but as a man among men, and then fled, hunted, and disgraced. His heart raced as the weight of the mission settled over him. It was not the kind of task that one could take up without trembling. He thought of Pharaoh's face, his voice, the memory of how he spoke and how others bowed before him. He thought of the guards, the chains, the cold stone floors of the palace. He thought of the people of Israel, oppressed and beaten, their cries rising day after day like smoke. He had tried once, years ago, to defend one of them. He had struck out in anger, and that act had led to exile. Now, the voice of Allah was sending him back not to hide, not to live quietly, but to confront. Musa opened his mouth, his voice low and unsteady, shaped by honesty and humility, not resistance. My Lord, expand for me my chest. The words poured out of him like a prayer that had lived in him long before this night. It was not fear of the task alone that made him speak. It was the knowledge of his own limitations. He knew who he was. He knew his weaknesses. And so, before taking a single step toward Pharaoh, he asked not for strength of sword or clever speech, but for inner space, a heart wide enough to carry this mission, a spirit firm enough not to collapse beneath its weight. And ease for me my task. He asked not that the task be taken away, not that it be delayed, but that it be made manageable, that the path be opened before him, that the thorns be cleared, and the way made smooth not because he feared work, but because he longed to serve well, and untie the knot from my tongue, that they may understand my speech. This plea came from a place deep within. Musa had struggled with speech for as long as he could remember. His words did not always flow. They came slowly, sometimes tangled, sometimes strained. He had lived with that burden in Pharaoh's court, and now he was being asked to speak before the same man again, not just speak, but deliver the truth of God. He feared not for himself, but for the message, that it might be lost in his stammer, that the beauty of it might be missed because of his mouth's weakness. So he asked, not to be eloquent, not to impress, only to be clear, that they may understand, that the words would reach not just ears but hearts, and appoint for me a minister from my family. Now his voice grew firmer. He was not bargaining. He was reaching for the one person who had always stood with him, the one who knew him before the court, before exile, the one who had listened to him stumble and had never turned away, the one whose speech was fluent, whose heart was steady, whose presence made Musa feel less alone. Harun, my brother, increase through him my strength, and let him share my task. There was no jealousy in this request, no wish to pass off the burden. It was the request of a brother who knew his own limits and who knew the strengths of the one beside him. Harun had a voice that carried weight, that flowed with ease. He had a calmness that could balance Musa's fire. They were different, but together, they could be one voice, one mission. The task was great, too great for one man, but not too great for two, bound by blood and faith, that we may glorify you much and remember you much. Indeed, you are ever seeing of us. Musa did not ask for support for his own sake, not for comfort or companionship alone. He asked so that the mission would thrive, so that they could glorify their Lord in every word, every step, every breath, so that in the face of Pharaoh's arrogance, there would be not just resistance, but remembrance, that they would not forget who sent them, who guided them, who watched over them. There was silence then, but it was not empty. It was filled with the weight of Musa's prayer. The mountain held its breath. The fire still burned, and the voice, when it came again, came with such nearness, such mercy, that Musa's heart opened further than he thought possible. You have been granted your request, O Musa. There was no delay, no hesitation. His plea had been heard, every word of it. His chest would be expanded, his task would be eased, his speech would be clarified, his brother would stand beside him. The Lord of the heavens and the earth had answered him, completely and without pause, and we had already conferred favor upon you another time. The voice began to remind him, not to burden him with memory, but to show him that this moment had not come out of nothing, that he had always been under divine care, even when he could not see it. When we inspired to your mother what we inspired, saying, "Put him into the chest and cast it into the river will throw it onto the bank, and there an enemy to me and an enemy to him will take him." The memories rose within him, the quiet face of his mother as she placed him in the basket, the way the current carried him gently through the reeds, the arms of the queen who lifted him from the water, the palace he once called home, though it had never felt like home. He had been rescued before he could ask for rescue, loved before he could speak, protected from harm before he could know what danger was. And I bestowed upon you love from me, that you would be brought up under my eye. These were not new truths, but now, in this sacred place, they felt like pieces of a tapestry finally being shown. His whole life, he had been watched over, guided, prepared. Now, with the fire before him and the mountain behind, Musa no longer wondered why he had been chosen. He did not feel worthy, but he did feel ready. Not by his own strength, but by the mercy that had carried him here. Egypt waited, Pharaoh waited, but so did justice, so did truth. And now he would carry it with him, not alone, never alone. The mountain wind stirred softly around Musa as he stood in the sacred valley, still bathed in the warm glow of the fire that burned without flame. He held his staff tightly in one hand, the same staff that had turned into a living serpent and back again. The air no longer felt heavy with fear. Instead, it was full of clarity. His request had been made with a trembling heart, but the answer had come without delay. His Lord had granted it, every part of it. Harun would stand beside him. His chest would be expanded. His speech would be eased. He had not been turned away, nor left to face the weight of his task alone. You have been granted your request, O Musa. The words echoed gently within him, and their meaning reached past the moment. They were not only an answer, they were a sign of love. He felt it not imagined, not hoped for, but felt as clearly as he felt the stone beneath his bare feet. This was not the first time he had been carried by unseen mercy. It would not be the last. The voice continued, now not with command, but with remembrance. Musa listened as his Lord drew back the curtain of time and placed before him the story of his own life. Not as Musa had remembered it, but as it had truly been. The tale of his rescue from the river was not just a mother's desperate act. It was divine intention. The chest, the water, the queen, the Palestinian of it had been random. Each part had been orchestrated with tenderness, each step protected by the one who knew him before he was even born. Did I not cast love upon you, so that you would be brought up under my eye? Musa closed his eyes, and he could almost see it. The soft hands of his mother, trembling as she kissed his forehead one last time and laid him in the chest, the reeds swaying in the Nile, the sun glinting off the water. He had no memory of those moments, but now they came to him as if they had been waiting all these years to be seen. He had been chosen not today, but long before. He had been loved not just by a mother who risked everything, but by the Lord of all creation who had whispered to her heart. The favor he now stood in was not new. It had always been with him. When your sister went walking and said, "Shall I direct you to one who will nurse him?" Then we returned you to your mother, so that her heart would be comforted, and she would not grieve. Musa remembered his sister's cleverness, how she had stayed near the banks of the Nile, watching, waiting, how she had approached the palace with the boldness of a child whose heart was fueled by love, how his mother had been called, brought into the palace to nurse her own son. At the time, it had all seemed like fortune, like survival against the odds. Now he saw it for what it truly was. It had been written, it had been protected. He had been held not only in a mother's arms, but in divine hands. And you killed a soul, and we delivered you from grief and tried you with a test. Then you remained for years among the people of Madyan. Then you came here as decreed, O Musa. His chest tightened. The memory of the man he had killed rushed back like a sudden wave. The fear, the regret, the shame. He had not meant to kill. He had tried to defend. But his strength had overtaken him. That single act had broken his life in two. He had fled not only Pharaoh's punishment, but his own self-condemnation. For years he had wondered whether he would ever be forgiven, whether he had ruined what had once been a life of potential. But now the voice told him he had been delivered, that the grief had not swallowed him because it had not been allowed to, that even in exile he had not been forgotten. Madyan had not been a place of hiding. It had been a place of healing, of preparation, of quiet molding. Every year in the desert, every sunrise over barren land, every sheep led across the rocks, every evening beneath the starset had all been part of his journey. Every step led to this mountain, to this fire, to this call. And I have prepared you for myself. The words landed like soft thunder in his chest. There was no rebuke in them, no reminder of failure, only purpose. He had not wandered through life without meaning. Even his mistakes had been folded into something greater. He had been prepared, not for a life of escape or regret, but for a mission no other could carry. This was not punishment. This was love, fierce and tender, patient and powerful. Go, you and your brother, with my signs, and do not slacken in my remembrance. Musa felt strength return to his body. It was not the strength of youth or physical power. It was the strength of being seen, being chosen, being sent with purpose. The command to go was clear, but it came wrapped in comfort. He would not go with empty hands. He would not go with only memories. He would go with signs, with truth, and most of all, with the remembrance of the one who had shaped him. Speak to him with gentle speech, perhaps he may be reminded or fear. He understood then the heart of his mission. It was not to destroy. It was not to humiliate. It was to awaken. Even Pharaoh, with all his arrogance and cruelty, was not beyond the reach of mercy. He was to be approached not with violence, but with gentle truth. Musa was to speak not from anger, but from remembrance, from trust, from obedience. Musa breathed deeply, letting the words settle inside him. The task was enormous. The risks were real, but the voice had given him everything he needed. Not just tools, not just permission, but assurance. The assurance that he was not alone, that his past had not disqualified him, that his brother would walk beside him, that his Lord was watching. He looked once more at the fire. It burned still, not consuming, not fading. It seemed to whisper something without sound, that he was ready now, that the time had come. The mountain had been a place of revelation, but it was not the end. It was the beginning. Below, his wife and child waited. Ahead, his brother waited. Beyond them, Pharaoh waited. And above them all, his Lord watched, guided, and sustained. He would go, he would speak, he would remember, and he would trust. The fire still burned with its unchanging light. casting long shapes over the rocks as the night deepened around the mountain. But the light was no longer only around Musa. It had entered him. It moved in the space behind his ribs, where fear had once made its home. He stood now not only as a man, but as a messenger, not because of what he had done, but because of what had been declared. The voice of his Lord had lifted him, shaped him, and called him. Yet even as the certainty of divine purpose steadied him, the weight of what lay ahead pressed against his chest. He looked down at his hands, still feeling the tingling from the sign of the serpent, still remembering the strange light that had covered his skin when he drew his hand from beneath his cloak. These were not illusions, they were reminders. They told him he had been given something from beyond this world, but gifts alone would not silence Pharaoh. Signs alone would not part hearts turned hard by arrogance and centuries of power. The message he carried would pierce, but would it be received? He turned slightly toward the slope, the path that would take him down the mountain to his family and then, eventually, to Egypt. The thought of Pharaoh filled his mind. He saw again the marble pillars, the jeweled throne, the gold-threaded garments, the sharp gaze that cut through silence like a blade. Musa had once known that court well. He had walked its halls, dined at its tables, spoken with its counselors. Yet even then, he had never belonged to it. Not truly. He had known injustice when he saw it. He had burned with anger at the sight of his people beaten and broken. And now, years later, he was being asked not to flee from it again, but to return with a message that would shake its very foundations. His chest rose with a slow breath. The air was dry and cool, but inside him the fire was still burning. Not the fire of anger or revenge, but the fire of truth. And yet, even with all the signs, with all the assurances, he could not deny the weight of fear that still lingered in the corners of his heart. He had asked for Harun because he knew his own limits. He had asked for ease in speech because he knew his tongue. Now, in the stillness that followed the divine reassurance, he stood face to face with the immensity of his calling. He whispered, though he knew the one who had spoken with him needed no volume to hear, "My Lord, I am afraid they will deny me." The words came from the deep place of honesty. He was not protesting. He was not refusing. He was simply uncovering the fears that lay curled in his spirit. It was not that he doubted the truth. It was that he doubted himself. He feared the hardness of Pharaoh's heart, the cruelty of his court, the armies that stood ready to silence dissent before it could breathe. He feared that his words would fall like stones into deep water, unseen and unheard, and my chest will tighten, and my tongue will not be fluent. He was not a man of smooth speech. He did not command attention with words. His thoughts were deep, but they did not always find the path to expression. He had lived with this difficulty for as long as he could remember. It had followed him even in Pharaoh's court, where fluency was power. And now he was to return, not as a silent witness, but as a bearer of truth. The weight of that irony made him lower his eyes. "So send for Harun. He is more fluent than I am in speech." His voice remained soft, not from timidity, but from the reverence that filled the air. He spoke not as one pleading for escape, but as one begging for success. He knew what lay ahead would test every part of him. He would need Harun's voice, not just for eloquence, but for strength, for companionship, for steady presence. "And they have a charge against me, so I fear they will kill me." The memory rose again, the body of the man he had struck, the rush of panic, the whispers in the streets, the warning that had driven him to flee Egypt. That act, born of justice and fury, had not been forgotten. He carried it still, not only in memory but in the way others might still speak his name with suspicion. Pharaoh's court would not have overlooked such a moment. He was no longer one of them. He was the one who had broken rank, the one who had vanished. And now he would return, not in silence but in defiance. That alone might be enough to bring about his death. The fire did not move, but the voice came again, gentle and unshaken. "No, go both of you with our signs. Indeed, we are with you, listening." It was not a denial of the danger, it was something greater. It was a promise. "Go. Do not go alone. Take Harun. Take the signs, take the truth. But more than that, take us. We are with you. We will hear every word, every silence, every moment of trembling, every breath of resistance and every breath of remembrance. There would be no moment when Musa and Harun would be alone. No moment when Pharaoh's power would stand unchallenged by the presence of the one who had created him. So go to him and say, "We are messengers of your Lord. Send with us the children of Israel, and do not torment them. We have come to you with a sign from your Lord, and peace will be upon those who follow the guidance." The words unfolded like a path. This was not only a message of warning, it was a message of invitation. Peace to those who follow the guidance. Musa saw it then. Even Pharaoh, proud as he was being given a choice. This mission was not only to liberate the oppressed, it was to awaken the oppressor. The message carried both power and mercy. The signs would show the truth. The voice would carry the offer. What Pharaoh did with it would be his own decision. It was not Musa's job to force hearts open. It was his job to speak, to deliver the truth, to stand where few dared to stand, and to say what few dared to say. With Harun at his side, with signs in his hands, with God in his every step, he would go. Musa looked again at the flame. It had not dimmed. It had not flickered. It remained as it had been from the beginning, steady, alive, present. He did not know what would happen in Egypt. He did not know how Pharaoh would respond. He did not know how long the path would be or how heavy the burden, but he knew now what he was. Not a fugitive, not a shepherd, not a prince, a messenger, sent not by blood or birth, but by the Most High. He turned his face toward the night, toward the desert, toward his family waiting below. The mountain had spoken, the fire had revealed, the voice had prepared him. Now, he would begin. The descent from the mountain was slow. Musa's feet pressed carefully against the stone, but his thoughts moved with far greater weight than his steps. The fire still glowed behind him, untouched and eternal, but the voice had fallen silent for now, not because it had departed, but because it had already said what was needed. The silence that followed was not empty. It was filled with knowing, with a presence that lingered even in quiet. Every word still echoed in his soul. The mission had been given. The signs had been shown. The permission had been granted. Now he would carry them, not just in his hands, but in the very rhythm of his breath. As he walked, his mind did not rest. Questions rose like wind across the desert, not questions of doubt, for his Lord had answered every fear with mercy, every hesitation with clarity, but questions of process, of possibility. He began to think aloud, his voice low and rough from emotion. How will they listen? They know me. They remember me. I was once one of them. Then I was not. I left without word. I have been silent for years. Will they not say, "Who are you to return as a messenger?" The wind offered no reply, but the memory of the voice returned. "We are with you, listening." That was the answer to all things. Still, Musa could not stop wondering, what if Pharaoh rejects me outright? What if he mocks the signs? What if his magicians twist the truth and cause confusion? What if fear grips the hearts of the people, and they are too afraid to follow? What if I fail to speak as I must, and my message is buried beneath the weight of my own tongue? He stopped walking, the dark sand settling around his feet. The stars above were wide and bright. The path ahead led to his waiting family, and then farther, to Harun and Egypt beyond him. He looked up, and though no sound came from the heavens, he remembered, "We are with you." That was the foundation. He remembered the staff in his hand. What had once been ordinary wood had become a sign of divine command. He remembered the way it had moved on the ground like a living creature, and then returned to his palm as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. He remembered the light that had flowed from his own hand, the warmth that had shone like a lantern before disappearing again into skin. These were not tricks. They were not meant to impress. They were signs. Signs not only for Pharaoh, but also for Musa himself. A reminder that his speech, his history, his fear, none of these would stop the will of the one who had sent him. Still, a deeper question formed in his heart, a quiet one that had always lived in the back of his thoughts but had never been given voice until now. Why me? He whispered it to the night. It was not asked in resistance, but in wonder. Why would the Lord of the heavens and the earth choose him? A man with flaws, with a troubled past, with words that often stumbled. Why not someone else, someone greater, someone cleaner in history and clearer in speech? And though no sound answered his question, something within him shifted. He remembered what had been said on the mountain. And I have prepared you for myself. He let the words rest within him, not for greatness, not for glory, not for comfort or fame, but for purpose. He had been shaped, not in spite of his wounds, but through them. Not away from his struggles, but inside them. He had learned justice not from books, but from the sting of watching his people beaten and abused. He had learned humility not in a palace, but in the fields of Madyan, caring for animals, walking beneath wide skies with only silence for company. He had learned fear, yes, but he had also learned endurance. He had learned what it meant to be alone, and what it meant to be held by something unseen. That was why he had been chosen, not because he was perfect, but because he was prepared. As he neared the place where his family waited, the questions slowed. He began to feel the closeness of what was next. Soon, he would find Harun. Soon, they would stand side by side, not only as brothers, but as messengers. He imagined the moment he would speak to Harun, telling him what had happened on the mountain, what had been commanded. He wondered what his brother would say, how his eyes would widen, how his voice would respond. And still, beneath the anticipation, that steady thread of fear remained. He knew what Pharaoh was capable of. He had seen the pride in his voice, the fire in his eyes, the ruthlessness with which he held power. He remembered the whips of the taskmasters, the silence of the slaves, the cold cruelty of a ruler who believed himself to be a god. To walk back into that court and speak truth to that face, it was no small thing. He wondered aloud again, what if he kills me before I speak? And the memory returned. No, go both of you with our signs. Indeed, we are with you, listening. It was not only reassurance, it was a command cloaked in mercy. His thoughts turned to the people of Israel. He remembered their faces, the weight in their eyes, the way they moved with caution, always glancing behind them, always bracing for the next blow. They had cried out for so long, cries that rose above the walls of Egypt and filled the spaces between stars, cries that had never been forgotten. He was not going to Pharaoh only to challenge him. He was going for them, to deliver them, to tell them that they were seen, that their cries had been heard, that the one who created them had not abandoned them in bondage. Would they believe him? After years of silence, would they trust that liberation was near? He did not know, but he knew what he must do. He pressed forward. Each step was no longer just a movement through the desert. It was obedience. It was surrender. It was a messenger walking toward the weight of his mission. As he drew near to the place where his wife waited, he saw the faint outline of their shelter in the moonlight. She looked up at the sound of his steps and rose to meet him. There was concern in her eyes. He had been gone long, and the night had grown colder. He came to her slowly, the firelight still in his eyes, though no flame was near. I have seen something, he said. I have heard what cannot be unheard. She listened without interruption, her hand resting on the child beside her. We must go to Egypt, he said, but not alone. First, I must find Harun. She did not ask questions. She only nodded, for she saw something in him that had not been there before. Not just resolve, not just clarity, but the echo of a voice that had spoken into the very center of him. And so they gathered their things. The journey would begin again, but this time Musa walked not as a shepherd returning to the land he once fled. He walked as a messenger, carrying the light of a fire that did not burn, with words that were not his own, on a path that had been written before he was born. The fire still burned far behind him now, but its glow lived on in the memory of Musa as he walked. His family moved quietly beside him. The desert lay stretched ahead, wide and ancient, marked by nothing but the stars above. Each step forward carried him further from the mountain and closer to the task that now defined his life. There was no turning back. What had been spoken in the sacred valley of Tua had sealed his path. The silence of the journey did not unsettle him. He welcomed it. It allowed him to hold on to every word that had come from his Lord. He replayed them like verses of a song written in his chest. The fire may have remained on the mountain, but its message had gone with him. His wife watched him with quiet attention. She had seen the change in his eyes when he returned from the mountaintop. There had been no need for long explanations. She had known him long enough to recognize when he was carrying something greater than words could hold. He had spoken simply, that he had heard a voice, that it was the voice of his Lord, that a task had been given to him, one that would take them back to the land he had left behind. Her gaze had not filled with fear, only readiness. Her trust did not come from certainty in the outcome, but in the truth she saw in him. As they continued through the desert, the moon high above offered its silver light. Musa walked with steady steps, but his mind was no longer filled with questions. It was filled with preparation. Soon he would find Harun. Soon he would share what had happened on the mountain. He imagined the moment his brother's face would turn to him, full of wonder and disbelief, then resolve. Harun had always been strong in speech, but more than that, he had been steady in spirit. Musa had known no one more loyal. To walk into Pharaoh's court without him would feel like walking into the sea without knowing how to swim. But with Harun beside him, the path seemed possible. And yet, for all the clarity, the moment of parting from that holy mountain now arrived like a quiet ache. Musa did not turn to look back, but he felt it behind him. He could still see the strange light against the stone, still feel the weight of divine presence in the very air. He had stood barefoot before his Lord. He had heard the voice not with ears alone, but with every cell in his body. Now that moment was behind him, and what lay ahead was the world, the weight of people, the resistance of Pharaoh, the uncertainty of hearts. It felt like standing at the edge of something vast, and stepping into it with only the promise that he would not be alone. That promise, however, was everything. He remembered the words again. "Go, you and your brother, with my signs, and do not falter in my remembrance." The instructions were simple, but they carried layers of meaning. He had not been told to argue Pharaoh into submission. He had not been told to overwhelm him with force. He had been told to speak, to remember, to deliver signs, to keep his heart fixed not on the outcome, but on the one who had sent him. When the sun rose the next day, the light revealed the edges of the city in the far distance. Musa and his family rested briefly, gathered their strength, then pressed on. Each step closer to Egypt tightened the pull in his chest. He had grown up there, walked those streets, known those walls. His memories of that place were not all cruel. There had been kindness in the queen who had raised him. There had been years of comfort. But the deeper memory always returned. The weight of injustice, the silent grief of his people, the violence that stained the stone. Now he would return, not as a son of Pharaoh's house, but as a messenger from the Lord of all creation. He reached the edge of the city and sent for Harun. Word passed through familiar paths. When Harun came to him, the embrace between the two men was long and wordless at first. Years had passed since they had last stood together, but the bond had not faded. They looked at each other, eyes carrying all that was unspoken. Then Musa began to tell his brother what had happened. He spoke of the fire, of the voice that had called him by name. He described the signs, the staff that had become a serpent and returned to wood, the hand that had shone with light and returned to flesh. He spoke of the mission, the command to go to Pharaoh, the words he was to deliver, the warning, the mercy, the promise of peace to those who would follow the guidance. He told Harun of his own fears, of the prayer he had made, and of how the Lord had accepted that prayer, naming Harun as his partner. Harun listened without interruption. His eyes widened at first, then steadied. When Musa finished, there was silence between them. Harun stepped closer and placed a hand on his brother's shoulder. "If this is what our Lord has commanded," he said, "then we go, together." Musa felt a wave of quiet relief pass through him, not because he had doubted Harun, but because hearing that answer from his own lips was like hearing the call confirmed again. They would go, two brothers bearing the words of God. not warriors with blades, but messengers with signs. The next days were spent in preparation. Musa and Harun prayed together. They recalled the signs. They rehearsed the words that would be spoken. But most of all, they remembered. The command had not been to overpower Pharaoh. It had been to speak with gentle speech, that perhaps he might be reminded or might fear. The heart of the mission was not wrath. It was invitation, an offer of mercy from the one who had created both the slave and the king. Finally, the morning came when they stood at the gates of Pharaoh's palace. Musa felt the past rise within him, the smell of the stone, the sharpness of the guards' voices, the cold pride of the corridors. But he stood taller now, not with the posture of royalty, but with the grounding of truth. Harun stood beside him, silent but sure. They entered. The halls had not changed. The wealth was still on display, the symbols of power still carved into the walls. The guards still moved with indifference, but Musa was not here for the halls. He was not here for the gold. He was here for the one who sat on the throne, and for the people who lived in chains beneath it. As they were brought into the court, and Pharaoh appeared in his robe of finery, seated in grandeur, Musa's heart did not waver. He had left the fire behind him, but he had brought its light with him. It was in his words, in his purpose, in the presence that now filled the space between him and the man who claimed to be a god. The time for silence had ended. The time for speech had come. What had begun on the mountain would now be spoken in the halls of kings, and the voice of truth would be heard. The court of Pharaoh fell into silence as Musa stood before him, his staff in hand, his brother Harun beside him. The opulence of the hall gleamed under the weight of torches and polished stone. Marble pillars soared toward ceilings carved with images of power, war, and gods shaped by human hands. Rows of attendants and guards lined the chamber, still and watchful, uncertain whether to laugh or draw swords. The throne was raised above the rest, draped in fine fabric and shadow. Pharaoh sat upon it, his face unreadable, his fingers resting lightly on the arms of his seat, as if he were waiting to see what sort of game was unfolding before him. Musa felt the memory of this room press at the edges of his mind. He had once walked these halls as a youth. He had learned their sounds and secrets. He had known the polished floor, the sharp scent of myrrh in the air, the rhythm of protocol. But now he stood not as one among them. He stood as a stranger, but not alone. He stood as a messenger, and the one who had sent him was closer than his breath. He looked up at Pharaoh, his voice steady, drawn from a place beyond fear. "We are messengers of the Lord of the worlds," he said. "Send with us the children of Israel, and do not torment them. We have come to you with a sign from your Lord. Peace will be upon those who follow the guidance." The words hung in the air, soft but immovable. There was no trembling in his voice, no apology in his tone. He did not ask as a man seeking favor. He spoke as one bearing a truth that could not be bent to fit another's pride. Pharaoh leaned forward slightly, and his lips curved, not in welcome, but in amusement. His voice, when it came, was laced with sarcasm. "Did we not raise you among us as a child?" he asked. "And did you not remain among us for years of your life? And then you committed that act you committed, and you were of the ungrateful." The words were sharp, meant to cut. They reminded Musa of the weight of his past, the act that had driven him into exile. Pharaoh was not ignorant. He remembered well. And now he used it as a blade, trying to drive shame into the space where courage had begun to rise. But Musa did not flinch. "I did it then while I was of those who were astray," he said, "and I fled from you when I feared you. But my Lord granted me judgment and made me of the messengers." It was not a denial. It was a confession without regret. The past had shaped him, but it did not define him. He did not stand before Pharaoh pretending to be flawless. He stood bearing the weight of mercy. The one who had prepared him had not chosen him in spite of his mistakes, but through them. Even Pharaoh's accusations could not undo what the fire on the mountain had revealed. "And is that the favor you remind me of?" Musa continued. "That you enslaved the children of Israel?" The words landed like stones. Pharaoh had tried to shame him for the years spent under his roof, but Musa turned the shame back upon the throne. What kindness could be claimed by a king who crushed a people? What favor could be claimed by one who enslaved others? The court murmured. The boldness in Musa's words stirred unease. He had not begged. He had not trembled. He had not turned his eyes from Pharaoh's. He had spoken with the clarity of a man who had stood barefoot on sacred ground. Pharaoh's expression hardened. "And what is the Lord of the worlds?" he asked. Musa answered without pause. "The Lord of the heavens and the earth and whatever is between them, if you should be convinced." Pharaoh scoffed and turned to those around him. "Do you not hear what he says?" But Musa did not yield. "Your Lord and the Lord of your first forefathers." Pharaoh's voice rose. "Indeed, your messenger who has been sent to you is mad." Still, Musa did not break. "The Lord of the east and the west and whatever is between them, if you should understand." The court shifted. Some whispered, others stared. The exchange had become something more than confrontation. It was a battle of voices, not in volume but in truth. Pharaoh spoke from pride. Musa spoke from certainty. Pharaoh, feeling the control of the room slipping, raised his hand. "If you take a god other than me," he said coldly, "I will surely place you among the imprisoned." Musa stood firm. "Even if I brought you something manifest?" Pharaoh's eyes narrowed. "Then bring it, if you should be of the truthful." Musa stepped forward and cast his staff to the ground. Before the eyes of the court, it shifted and turned. The wood writhed, twisting and thickening until it became a serpent. Gasps rose around the chamber. The snake moved with power, its form alive and undeniable. No trick, no illusion, real. Then Musa drew his hand from beneath his cloak, and it shone with light, white and radiant, brighter than the torches, impossible to ignore. The court drew back. Even Pharaoh blinked. The signs had been given, the message had been delivered, the truth had been spoken in the house of falsehood. But Pharaoh did not fall. His pride wrapped itself tighter around him like a cloak. He called for his magicians. He summoned the minds of his kingdom. He refused to believe, but the seed had been planted. Later, Musa and Harun stood beneath the open sky. The palace was behind them. The city, for all its splendor, was now a field of resistance. Pharaoh had not bowed, but the work had begun. Signs had been shown, words had been spoken. The fire of truth had entered Egypt. Musa looked at Harun, his brother's eyes filled with resolve. They had spoken not as men seeking reward, but as servants fulfilling command. What lay ahead would not be easy. Pharaoh would resist. The people would waver. But the Most High had not promised ease. He had promised presence. And that presence had never left them. They turned their eyes toward the horizon. The path was long, but the message was alive. What had begun at the burning bush would not end until every word had found its place, until every sign had fulfilled its purpose. And so they walked forward, not as fugitives, not as prophets of doom, but as messengers of mercy, carrying the fire of guidance into the heart of a land that had forgotten what it meant to fear the one who sees all. In their steps was remembrance, in their breath was obedience, and in their hearts was the nearness of the one who had called them by name.